Hello and welcome to episode 274 of the Veeam Community Recap. I am by myself once again. Madalena is out on assignment, so I am driving the recap solo. Will I break the rules? You must stay tuned to find out. So I'm Rick Vanover, the Rickatron, and I am going to go through the top community content that we have to feature this week in the recap. So let's jump into it. So first of all, if you're watching this for the first time, go on over to community.veeam.com. This is a really great resource that we love to have as a hub for all of the great community activities. So first up, I want to bring your attention to some featured content. So the featured content I'm going to start with comes from Andreas Bullman. Andreas has a deep dive blog post of the hardened repository versus Linux repository versus Veeam infrastructure appliance for 13.1 deployments. And awesome AI images aside, friends, this is a very thorough blog post. Lots of pros and cons of different environments. You know, there's a lot to it. You know, some folks might say, what is a Linux repository, right? Well, it is the Linux OS with Veeam backups on it, and then some of the different connectivity that might come in. Wow, these are really good graphics, by the way. One thing I'll say is that, then there's a Veeam hardened repository. You've heard about that, for example. And so here's a great summary visual, but then also, oh, that's really good. Friendly access only. Really good perspective here. Again, funny images aside, this is a very good post here, friends. I want to draw your attention to the Veeam infrastructure appliance one. This is one that I personally have been starting to do a lot more with to help scale the Veeam deployment. And let's see if I can get this just right. Yeah. So roles like backup repository, backup proxy, hardened repository, gateway server, mount server, WAN acceleration, as well as a sober extent, really can be on that. And that is that just enough OS. And some of you who have been following us for a long time know that we've really been on a journey to add more up here, but not yet. Keep this in mind. These tape, off-host proxy, and NDM server, not NDMP, not yet on there. So again, some of the limitations, but also the great opportunities to do this. Wow, this is really good, Andreas. I love it. And then, some questions about, do you put those on the same server? Some use cases there and some recommendations. And I love this kind of case one, maximum security. This is what it would look like. Or case two, I want this. Case three, I want that. So really some architectural decisions. And what I really love about this, friends, is that, Veeam is so flexible that you can have it really any way you want it. And when you think about how you would consume Veeam, chances are you're talking to a partner or one of our Veeam team to really help you guide your journey. And again, some links to bring it all home. This is really good, Andreas Bullman. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, next up, I want to give a shout out to Marvin from Germany, one of the MVPs, yes, and he's talking about some of the HA, high availability improvements that came in 13.1. True story, friends. I was really shocked how popular high availability was with the 13.0 release. I actually kind of was like, man. But in the field, like larger deployments, they're really liking it. So call me surprised. I'm really glad that this one has taken off. Let's hear what Marvin's got to talk about the new 13.1 high availability improvements. So he has covered this before. I think this is the link. Let me double check. Yes, it's linked right here. So when he mentions his previous blog, it's right there. So he is one of our pre-sales technical team, systems engineer, and Marvin's a great one. So he's got some summary information here, talks about the requirements, cross subnet deployments, which, by the way, that was one of the biggest pieces of feedback of the earlier, the first release of HA. It's like that defeats the point, right, of having it required on the same network, or at least you'd have to introduce some network shenanigans to make that requirement met. So a couple other highlights of what's new, and he goes through it and with some configuration examples. Really good stuff. If you're interested in the HA cluster capability, there's the synchronization task happening. Good stuff. And, and typical German style, he goes all the way down to the end to make the endpoint, the different nodes, the summaries, and you can see that it's synchronized. So good stuff. Thank you, Marvin. Good to call your name again. All right, third on the list, I'm not breaking the rule. Trust me, you see a lot of green tabs coming up. Bear with me. Third in the featured content comes from Chris Chowderhose, and Chris is going to talk about how to remove the Enterprise Manager link after the Veeam software appliance from Windows. This is something that's been really a big popular topic. Chris goes through, I'm going to come back to this KB article, but he talks about this process in the XML file to unlink, right? I want to draw your attention, because this is one of the probably the more frequently requested things, is migrating to Veeam software appliance from the Windows Veeam backup and replication to Linux. We do have this KB published now. It came earlier this year, and I want to tell you, this is a pretty thorough KB, but so many folks are wanting it for existing Veeam deployments. This walks you through the entire process, and there's links and things like that. If you want some professional advice, it would be a great opportunity to do a test with actually the data lab, meaning somehow take a backup of your existing Veeam backup and replication server, and then in a data lab, do a test, sure backup environment, do a test, even if it's a physical system. You might be able to, I wouldn't do that with a physical system. I wouldn't install the agent on a BNR production server. But if it's a VM, make another backup kind of on the side with another Veeam BNR and have a sure backup environment and do that type of thing. Are you with me? Let me know. Anyways, this is a really good post here about definitely in the case of removing the link to Enterprise Manager. I love this shout out, Chris, here. Have the configuration backup and a snapshot of your infrastructure. Okay, you could do that. Proper backups are good too, but both config backup and a backup, or worst case, a snapshot. So thank you so much, Chris. All right, now I'm going to sneak over to Special Department Town, and I want to give a shout out to Nicola. Hey, Nicola. And basically, Nicola has a blog post here that is the July Vanguard newsletter. Now, we have the Vanguard Blogspotlight, which I'll talk about here for a while, but you know, the Veeam Vanguard members are really pumping out content, and this is a great list across them all. I skimmed through that list, and again, thank you, Nicola, for that. And I want to draw your attention to Samaraj, which is Peter, one of the Vanguards from the Czech Republic. Peter has a blog post here about the replication side of Veeam backup and replication. We use this R word all the time, replication, VBR. Well, I don't think replication gets enough love. And I'm super happy that Peter is focusing on replication. This is something that I think for disaster recovery, for really high-speed recovery, and even same site environments, replication is where it's at. So let's take a look at what Peter's got for this replication. And right away, I love that he's talking about both Hyper-V's resilient change tracking and VMware's change block tracking. Walks through how you create a job, some of the settings, and honestly, replication's been there since version 1. This is a very innovative or iterated and innovated transport engine, right? One thing I'll tell you, I personally moved a little bit of my Hyper-V replicas in my home lab, and one of the options you have, let's see, this is a Hyper-V example here. Let me see if I can show you something that's pretty interesting about the logic here. When you do your replicas, there's an option. Let me go way back up here. There's an option right here. Replica seeding. So I already had a replica tree that was actually quite old, but it was still a replica tree of the same source VMs. If you do replica seeding, it'll figure it out and know that Veeam wrote it prior, and then it'll build the next replica restore point just in the differences of what's already there. I mean, this is really smart stuff, so something to think about. But anyways, Peter's walking through creating a replication job, standard options here. There is a metadata for a replica job that just basically keeps track of what happened, but honestly, you don't even need it. The example I spoke of, when I seeded to a replica that was already there, it just had to read everything to find out what had happened. And honestly, the checkpoint metadata tells you a lot, at least in Hyper-V. A couple of surprises. He had a untrusted cert, easy workaround, folders, and notes on the job. One thing I would highly recommend for the target environment is use really good self-describing names, so that you know that, hey, in this Hyper-V or VMware environment, it is something that is there for an intentional reason. It's not like a test VM, right? A couple of looks on the file system, and then failing over. Plan failover. The really important thing about doing a failover, this is actually the most important part of it here. It is a good way to end the blog, but I would highlight a lot of folks have forgot this. So once you fail over, you got to, permanent failover, which is commit it, undo it, or fail back, right? So you can't leave it in this kind of limbo state. So it's kind of like instant recovery. You got to like migrate it to production. This is a similar type of logic here. Anyways, great to call your name again, Peter. Love the shout out to the replication engine. That's where it's at. All right, next up in the special department, I want to take a blog from our security side of our portfolio. So the Securiti AI company, which as many of you know, we acquired late last year, finished the acquisition late last year. I saw a really compelling blog post over there, and I just want to bring it to everyone's attention. There was a really interesting scenario with a client when there was a cloud region outage. So let's take a look at the summary here. In March 2026, drone strikes physically damaged AWS data centers in the United Arab Emirates. And that really kind of put a lot of the planned resiliency elements to test and at risk. It's like, oh, we didn't think about the region being an issue. So I want to just highlight that this blog post walks through kind of what happened when multi-availability zones in a region weren't enough. So this is something at Veeam we have been talking about for a long time, multi-region, multi-cloud. It's a cloud native view of the 3-2-1 rule, especially because this threw some really interesting challenges where the regional cloud services were degraded. Native recovery was a challenge as well. This is actually probably the biggest one. So especially if you really are double down on the native in cloud protection, if the region is really at risk, this really paves the way for like what some of the cloud native backup that Veeam can help you with multiple region type things. And then, in this particular example, it talks about an unconventional recovery playbook. So cross-region data access, direct DKS and SSM, which I think were really probably processes that weren't part of the plan, and then cross-cloud over to Azure, which is interesting. I mean, multi-cloud is really hard. Not everyone is ready for that. Now, I will think that from a cross-cloud recovery, that's hard. But I do think it's reasonable to say that there's a lot of organizations that are multi-cloud. And when you think about having to move across, that's hard, but maybe different workloads were born in those different clouds. That's a little bit more normal. But then migrating over to a European region or other regions is just one of those things you got to think about from a compliance and sovereignty standpoint. Good kind of approval story of how the organization navigated the sovereignty there, and then why this worked. I think this is a really great story, and everybody I think can learn a little bit from it. So check this out. I'll have this in the recap link as well. And last up on this week's special department news is just a reminder to go to the events section of the Community Hub. Several user groups, aka shout out Madalena and Carolina, across Latin America coming up, and we have a little sneaky one coming up in Los Angeles as well. But and then looking into next month, we got some coming up in France. You can find one near you. Thank you, user group leaders. Thank you, sponsors. Thank you, Madalena and Carolina. Really big push for these. All right, last up this week I want to cover is who's new, straight from the desk of Sophia. We are happy to welcome plus 222, nice even number, members to the Veeam community. So welcome Yemi, Cybertanks, Wim VD. Actually, I like that one, by the way. I'm going to check that out. another random tech story of my life. And then Alfred's pick is Steve Page Home. You have a badge coming your way. It's actually kind of funny. You make me think about paging home. That's like, is that an interesting kind of history of how to get back home or things like that? I don't know the story of that, but that's cute. All right, next week I might be by myself again. We will see. I don't know how I'm going to do without supervision. But I hope you enjoyed this week's recap, keeping it short and tight. I will see you next week. I think it'll be 275, and we will go from there. Have a great